welcome to this week's edition of Inter-University Debate. Inter-University Debate is brought to you by Center for Constitutional Governance and Civic Space TV. It airs every Thursday from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. on Civic Space TV. It is a forum where students at the university are able to discuss matters that affect this country and the world at large. So today, we have students from All Saints University, Lango, all the way from Lira. You're welcome to the Inter-University Debate.
It's our pleasure.
So today we are discussing the future of the East African Federation. There are several issues to unpack in there. We are talking about the strength of the organs of the East African community, the issues of common market, common language. We are discussing issues of new entrants, for example, the Democratic Republic of Congo that joined this year in 2022. We have Somalia that has shown interest in joining the East African community, and the EAC decided to fast track the application of Somalia. So we are going to discuss those issues. With Somalia and DRC joining the East African community, are they coming in as a burden or opportunities for East African community? As Uganda, what opportunities do we have with the East African community? Do we have a chance of one day having a one president for the East African Federation? Several issues of conflicts, trade wars. We are going to unpack all these discussions today. So let me introduce the panelists from today. Like I mentioned, they are all students of All Saints University, Lango. Let me start with the first panelist that is right next to me, and that is Mr. Ojok Emmanuel Rolex. Ojok Emmanuel Rolex is the president of Debate Society at the university. He says he's an actor. So we are having an actor on the show today. I think it's the first time we are having an actor for the show.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, so Ojok is pursuing a diploma in procurement and logistics. So Ojok, you're welcome to today's show.
You're welcome, madam.
Okay, our second panelist, who is the guild president of All Saints University, Lango. I'm so excited, first of all, to have a female guild president. It's something that for most of us who advocate for women being at the forefront see it as a very big opportunity. So we have the guild president of All Saints University, Lango, who is Akello, Winny. She is pursuing a Bachelor of Arts in Education. Madam President, you're welcome.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, our third panelist for today is someone who is familiar with the Inter-University Debate. We had him on the previous edition when he was representing still All Saints University, Lango, and that is Mr. Acur Emmanuel. He is the guild speaker, so we have the guild in-house today. Yeah. So he's the guild speaker of All Saints University, Lango, and he's pursuing a diploma in social works and social administration. Emmanuel, you're welcome to the Inter-University Debate.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Okay, last but not least, we have Miss Akello Lucky Debla. She's also familiar to the Inter-University Debate. She's the secretary of the Debate Society at her university, and she's pursuing a diploma in medical records and health informatics. Debla, you're welcome.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Okay, so as usual, we have a gender-balanced panel, and we are discussing the East African Federation. As I introduced it earlier, the East African Federation, it has 7 countries at the moment. We have Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, and DRC. And as I mentioned, the EAC has decided to fast track the application of Somalia. So Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania joined in 2000. They joined in 2000, that is the EAC. And then we had Rwanda and Burundi acceding to the treaty in 2007. And then in 2016, we saw South Sudan as well joining. And then in 2022, we saw the DRC and now Somalia. It is one issue that we are going to delve into, the issue of the new entrants and what attracts them. But before we get into that discussion, let me start with Emmanuel. So Emmanuel, we would like you to kickstart this discussion with a background to the East African Federation.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. First and foremost, as I come in to give a background of this federation, first of all, we need to get to know what a federation is. To me, federation is a proposed political union. And in this case, we have 7 states that came together in that proposal to form up a union, which we are calling it East African Federation. Now, when we look way back in 1920s, we had a union. There's a secretary of the colonial called Leo Hami, had a thought that they should form a union as a colony to bring up the East African countries together. By then, we had Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. But again, in 1960s, the time Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda were attaining their independence from the United Kingdom rulership, we got to know that the federation, even these are the 3 leaders, the head of states, they also had it in the back of their mind that as they attain the independence, they need to get a federation that shall enable them have a strong ground. Because looking at the federation, meaning that you, first of all, have to have a population, you have to have a wide base where you can properly plan. Now, when we look at in 2016, the East African state sat in Arosa. Then they came up with an idea of forming a legal team that will sit and draft the constitution that shall govern them. Then in 2018, this legal expert sat in and came up with a draft. Madam Moderator, I decided to choose jumping other years that the federation has come above, particularly to give a quick recap on how rapid this federation is coming above. Then we have seen in 2020, I mean, way back in 1964, the issues of federation lost the trend. Then again, when we look at this, the 2016, when these 7 head of state came together, and in the sitting that the ministers, the union of ministers sat and agreed that we should form a team that will now enforce a law that shall govern the formation. So briefly, this is what I can bring about the history of the federation in East African form of, East African community.
Okay, thank you so much, Rolex. Let's have Emmanuel add to that.
Acur.
Yes.
Thank you very much, the moderator. I would like to agree with my colleague, Rolex. But then, you see, I want to make it more bigger, concrete,
Yes.
about the background of East African
Yes, please,
Federation.
please do.
Allow me appreciate and recognize the three head of states of the former East African community, Dr. Apollo Milton Obote, Julius Nyerere, and then Jomo Kenyatta. Now, the East African Federation came about in 1960s. We saw the idea coming out after Kwame Nkrumah came up with the idea of having a united Africa. And then Julius Nyerere likewise thought it wise to have East Africa combined. And we see Tanzania in the trend wanted to, first observe so that, wait a whole to see that Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania attained their independence as one country or as one community. With that, we saw the former Tanganyika emerging together with Zanzibar to make the United Republic of Tanzania. Now, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania came up in 1967. That was when the East African community took shape. We appreciate that East Africa community came about, and the three member states by then adopted and they joined. Now, every institution always have a challenge. 1977, the East African community, was disbanded. Now, this came about, the individual interest. Now, we see through when Apollo Milton wanted to champion the common man's charter, and Nyerere wanted to bring about the Ojama policy. Now, of course, these were three different countries, but then the head of states. And at the end of the day, tension emerged, of which the community could not stand. 1977, the East African community was disbanded. But then, basing on the history, 1999, the idea of reviving the East African community came about. And we saw it taking place or shape in 2000, when East Africa community again came up. And now this time around, the head of state also thought about forming up a political federation. And when you dig through, you will see the number of treaties that came in August 27th, 29th of August 2004. There was a summit that took place in Nairobi that brought the head of states. And in that, President Museveni, on the 28th of that very year, August, came up with the idea of having a committee to fast track the Federation of East Africa. How would the East Africa community attain that political federation? And around 2006, of course, November that very year, 2004, we saw the Deputy Secretary General of the Fast Track Something Committee about the political federation. Now, 2006, this committee brought back a report after doing the thorough investigation research. They moved to Tanzania, they came to Uganda, they were in Kenya, they went to university, higher institutions of learning, civil society organization, political institutions, to get the idea. But of course, when they came back with the report, we saw that the East Africans were eager towards having a federation. And the idea of having East African Federation with a single presidency, according to the report, they were like, the East Africans are okay with this, and they're eager, waiting. Now, in 2006, this committee gave us, they brought some saliva in our mouths that in 2013, East Africa would become one state. with a single president, single currency, or one currency, with East Africa, central bank, that came about. But then we saw in 2007, members started adding again. Rwanda came in, Burundi joined, Southern Sudan. Now we are seeing Congo coming in and Somalia. Now the question at the moment, just as we are seeing, how are these people coming? Are they bringing us a burden, or what are we going to get in this? So I think in the next minute, then we are going to discuss about that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Acur. That was a real concrete, like you put it, that you wanted to add to the historical background of the East African community and the East African Federation. So before I move back this way, I would like you to go back to that historical background. Now, the idea of having a federation that came up from our I would call them our forefathers, the three former presidents of the East African countries, that is Milton Obote from Uganda, and then Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, and then Mzee Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya. So what do you think these three, our forefathers, saw in coming up with the idea of an East African Federation?
Thank you very much once again, and for giving that opportunity. When we trace back in the history, the three forefathers came up with the idea of this community or a federation. Basically, one, to address the issue of the market. That is when we see the common market were put in place. The customary union came in. We also looked at the monetary union coming in. And the other pillar at the end was the political federation of East Africa. Looking at the common market, you'll also realize that there was a Kampala agreement that was formed, a treaty that was signed between the three member states or the head of states. The Kampala agreement to address the concern or the issue of that common market. Now, in that agreement or the treaty, we realize that, and I want to say that is what I think caused the breakout of the union by then, because in that treaty, the member states agreed that now that we are going to form up this common market and the custom union. The industrial policy kind of came in, where Uganda was given nitrogenous, factories, and then you realize that in that treaty, Tanzania was meant for tires development kind of, and they were going to have the industries. Now, but at the end of the day, we see that Tanzania and Kenya co-invited, and the industries, the nitrogenous factories, were constructed within their borders. Now, and yet at the end of the day, the idea of East African Federation of the community was to, one, address the issues of the market. We wanted a common market. Now, a market that, one, we could address, or, when it comes to market, you sell, you buy. That would give us a bargaining power when it comes to the global market. They thought it wise to have the customary union. You see, in the community by then, we wanted to come as one nation. Now, to bring the issue or to address the issue today we are in, that I'm a Ugandan, the East Africa, a Kenyan, a Tanzania, that idea wanted to scrap off. Remember, way back in 1960, when Julius Nyerere came up with the idea, after the idea of having a united Africa, the idea also came to have a united East Africa. Now, to avoid the issue of, the tension. I'm a Ugandan, a Kenyan, we wanted to have one voice. Now, when you're united, you can have the bargaining power. Then you can strengthen up the defense, the security. And the other thing we saw that came in the political federation. We are now seeing what is happening in these other countries after gaining our own sovereignty as countries, not as a federation. We are now seeing what is happening. Now, this thing, in the first place, it would also relieve us from the burden of debt, borrowing, because these countries, we have natural resources. Now, this would give us a united voice when it comes to exploitation of the natural resources. Basically, I can say briefly, that is what they thought of.
Okay, I see Rolex wants to add something. You can just add something, then I bring in Winnie.
Maybe basically to supplement and to answer the question that you asked, Madam. In our language, we have a saying that what an old man can see while seated, a young man, even though you climb the tallest tree ever, you will not see. Now, we have those, our forefathers, as you've said, they have seen something that to them it was wanting, that made them came up with a suggestion of uniting. First of all, they were looking at if you have a bigger family, issues of defense is addressed, insecurity is addressed. So that was one of the core vision that they had seen, just like I've said, they have seen when they were seated, but for a young person will not see even though he climbs. Sometime, okay, also in response to that, the wise man once says, if you want to go far, don't go alone. But if you want to go fast, you go alone. So our forefathers saw that if really they want to, make this home of ours, these states, a better state to live, which will even accommodate the grandsons and grandchildren of theirs. That is according to their vision. They should come up and make a stronger team that will sustain whatever pressure that may be got at the end of the day. So basically that was what was in their brain that made them came up together and say, we need to have a federation. We need to have a union that will enable us to be strong politically, socially, and economically. Just that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rolex, for that. Let me bring Winnie into the discussion. So Winnie, let's move away from the East African Federation that was formed by our forefathers and look at what we have right now, that is the East African community. What is the legal backing of the East African community? If you could briefly take us through that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I am humbled to be here this morning. Like she said, my name is Winnie, a student from All Saints University, Lango, located at the heart of Lira City. Actually, we cannot run away from the East African Federation because I am aware that East African Federation want to succeed the East African community. East African community had its treaty that came about in 1999, and in that treaty they came out with the functions, the objectives, and the organs, of which some of the before I go to that, the functions of the East African community, we are all aware that East African community comprise of only 3 countries, of which there are absolutely Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya. And when these 3 countries came out with their treaties, a treaty is an agreement between 2 or more parties. They came out with their several functions and their objectives, because for the 3 to come together, they really had a number of issues that they shared in common. And briefly, let me take you through some of the few functions of the East African community. One of them is like they focus in bringing up the good government in the country. Like when I talk about the good government, like out of corruption, they really wanted to follow the election guidelines of the country, and really putting in general putting democracy in practice. Then also they were also focused in the areas of crisis. Those are some of the functions. Then their main objectives were focused mainly in a summarized ways. I could say they were focused in promoting the cooperations amongst the three countries, promoting the securities, peace, because for a country to develop, we need security. For a country to develop, we need peace economically. I think that is what they had in mind.
Okay, thank you, Winnie, for that brief legal background and also the objectives and functions of the East African community that is clearly enshrined in the EAC Treaty of 1999. So thank you. Let me move to Lucky. So Lucky, we are talking about the East African Federation. I have had right from Emmanuel to Acur. For today's inter-university debate, I will just refer to him as Acur since we have two Emmanuels on the panel. So right from Emmanuel to Acur, they have been differentiating the Federation and then the East African community. I would like you to start right from there, the difference between the two, and also to take us through looking at the objectives that Winnie talked about of the EAC. This time we are talking EAC. What has the EAC so far achieved?
Thank you very much, moderator. As far as the East African Federation, we know that this is a proposed political union of the East African state, whereby we have these 7 states. And talk of the 3, which is Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, these countries were being colonized. When they got their independence, they came in to unite as one. That was in 1960s. However much they tried, they have achieved, but on the other hand, they have also have that challenge. They also failed. One of the achievements that the East African Federation has so far gotten is security. Like, let's take a look at these states. The security we are talking about is like when we have insurgency like in Uganda, we see these countries coming up to help Uganda to fight. For instance, we had the issue of LRA in Uganda, but they came up, they helped Uganda to fight in. Not only in that way, we used not to have free movement in these countries, but by coming up together in this federation is just like a union. There is a saying that says, your hand alone does not help you. And this was the reason why these people, they came together. They thought it wise that if we are to sit in one table and we be in one accord, we will be able to overcome some of the challenges. Talking of not only peace, we also have transport and communication. Nowadays, we can move from Uganda to Kenya to Tanzania, though we are still facing that challenge whereby if you are Ugandan, you don't move freely to Kenya, you don't move freely to Tanzania, you don't move freely to Rwanda. We still have that gap of which, if East Africa community is to stand as its aim was, this gap has to be bridged. We have to have that uniformity whereby if you're a Kenyan, you're coming to trade maybe in Uganda, you'll come in one accord, you trade without being finger pointed at. This is what we are trying to look at. Let's talk of joint tourism. The East African community has tried, because we have the audacity of going freely, like when we have, like for instance, let's talk of the national park that we have here and the one that is out. They are trying to promote this, because these are also source of income that can promote the development of a country. This is the reason why the East African Federation was formed. And when we talk of also trade, they have also achieved, because we see like these days we have that freedom of trading, though we still face that challenge of currency, because some other currency, let's talk of our own Ugandan shilling, we have the value of our money. We can't compare it with the, though Kenya, they also have shilling, but there is a difference in our currencies. And for them to harmonize this, the challenge that they have, though they have achieved something, they have to sit down, and maybe if they can bridge that with all these East African countries, and maybe if they can have that uniform currency, whereby if they will not say your money is of lesser value or the other one, but they will agree that if we can do this, it is going to be something of profit also to us. And also, as far as the East African community is, those days we are all aware East Africa, let me say Africa generally, was referred to as a dark continent. But coming of the East African Federation, we can see that these days we have free education. That is also one of the achievements that the East African community has achieved so far. Because when we have education, the issue of Africa or East Africa being referred to as a dark continent will not be there. We'll be able to communicate freely. When you want to study maybe out of your country, you're free to go and study. You're free to go and do trade. You're free to go and be wherever you want to. And this is also one of the great achievement that we have. And we also have that, another achievement that we have is harmonization of fiscal policy. We see that in these countries we have sharing of budgets, whereby Uganda can share their budget with Kenya and Tanzania. And also, being in this federation, the challenge that is also not going to be easy to achieve is integration. Because when we talk of integration, as far as Uganda is concerned, as Uganda we have debt. And I don't think Kenya or Tanzania will accept to come to integrate with Uganda, because Kenya will say, how can I come in to stand for Uganda who already have debts? Which means by me coming in, I'll be responsible for clearing that debt. Kenya or Tanzania or Somalia or Rwanda, they will say, let us first complete with our debt. So that if I'm to come in for integration to stand for all of us, that debt has to be clear. So we need to fight for this in order for these East African states to have that integration, to have that free movement that we have. Because when we talk of this East African Federation, their main aim was looking at how can we have these countries speaking one language, moving in the same path together. Because after their independence, they wanted to have that one union. But then it is hard to have this one union when these countries, others are falling apart. They don't want to come together. They don't want to understand each other because of their self-interest. But then when we look at East Africa, we're talking about its achievement. It has achieved something, but then its future, it is not to a greater extent, its future, because with what is going on right now, or with what is at hand, we see that for the future, or for this achievement to be perfected, a lot has to be done.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Debla. Let me come back to Emmanuel Rolex.
Yep.
So Emmanuel, let's talk about the new entrants. The East African community has had entrants coming in, I mean the countries coming in to accede to their treaty. Like we mentioned earlier, it was about 7 years when the treaty came into place, when Burundi and Rwanda joined. It did not take long. South Sudan and then DRC, we see Somalia joining. My question is, what is attracting the new entrants into the EAC?
Well, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. First and foremost, when we reflect back on number of points that we've put in that cause the union, first of all, to address issues of security. These are the states that have showcased their interest to join the union. One of their aim is to get in and get fully pledged support to help them fight their insecurity issues. Take a look at Somalia. It is declared already that it's already in, we call it, okay, they have already failed, actually. That is the actual language I can use.
A failed democracy.
They're already a failed democratic state. Now, their head of state are looking forward to get a better level, that even as they are in for power, their security won. So the reasons for their entrance is, first of all, to address the issues that is at their fingertips. Now, we may have a question that as they enter, if we are looking at the main body also failing somewhere, somehow, will the force they are bringing, will the weight they are adding be sustained with the existing weight? That is a question to be asked. So to me, I am looking at, if we are not careful enough to actually receive them when we have not swept inside and organize ourselves, we may move to the direction of failing. So that's to me. Because I am seeing rampant entrance, there most likely we shall see rampant exit because of vested interests, because we don't know clearly why they are coming in. We are assuming that maybe because of insecurity, they want to address such issues. Maybe they want to, you get. That's according to me. So we need to critically watch their entrance. Why are they coming? Are they coming with clean hand? Or there's something?
Okay. So let me move to Winny. So Winny, looking at the new entrants, the discussion about the new entrants already started from Emmanuel. We have had a long term of conflicts in Sudan, in South Sudan specifically. And Sudan joined the EAC. We have conflicts in Congo. Congo joined the EAC. Somalia would like to join the EAC, and we all know the long conflict that has existed in Somalia. As the original East African community, do you think we are taking on a burden? Like I always put it, do you think we are biting more than we can chew?
Yeah, I think so. We are at that great stake of biting more than we can chew, because when we look at all these countries that want to join the East African community, security-wise, they are not okay. This will at times also bring our economy down, because through supporting them and through welcoming them to really join the community, it means we are not only welcoming them with their strength, but also with their weaknesses. And for them, their nature is warlike, of which we are at the stake of maybe even inheriting their culture and also bringing it into the original countries that were in the federation. So I think there is that greater risk of involving them into the community, and it will greatly affect our economy, because we realize that when the economy is not stable, there is no way the production can really go on. So I think we are at a risk.
Okay. Yes, Acur. I see you want to add something, but let me just say something small. The discussion on the new entrants, both Winny and Emmanuel think we are taking on a burden, if I got you right. Now, Somalia, during when the EAC decided to fast track Somalia's application, the president of Somalia took us through the history that Somalia has with the East African countries, especially Uganda. And also, he talked about the different benefits Somalia comes with. And as we see as well, even just here in Uganda, we see most of the petrol stations being owned by Somalis. We see them deeply rooted into oil and gas and into business. So do you hold the same view that we are taking on a burden by taking on countries such as Somalia and the Democratic Republic of Congo?
Thank you very much. I think,
of course, additional to what you wanted to add earlier.
yeah, let me present this, then answer that. I want to agree with all my colleagues who have made in their presentation. But then I want to add something. You ask about the legal to my president, and then that would also drive us towards the question you posed. And I want to say this, that in 1917, when the idea of having a united Africa was being tabled, you see, there was the custom union that was signed between Uganda and Kenya. Now, Tanganyika joined in 1927. That was when Tanganyika came into the custom union, and it was a treaty signed. And that came about with the establishment of the East African High Commission in 1948. 1948, 1961, it was signed between the three member states. And in 1967 to 77, that was when the East African Committee or community became functional to its collapse in 1967. Now, after 1967, in 1984, now in 1984, you know, between that period, we know what happened. Now, a case in point, Uganda, the coup d'etat, the Idi Amin came in, overthrew Obote, the government. Now, 1984, in 1984, the heads of states met, and they signed what we are calling a mediation agreement. A mediation agreement, which was basically concerned with the position of assets and liabilities. Now, this mediation agreement came into force in the year it ushered in, in other words, that mediation agreement, in other words, ushered in the establishment of, or the revival of the East African community, of which a cooperation agreement was signed again on 3rd November 1993. That was signed. Now, when it was signed, we saw it started its operation on 4th March 1996. Now, that was when a secretariat of what we are calling Permanent Tripartite Commission was formed, and they took their shape when the office was established in Arusha. Now, with that, now we saw in more agreements were being signed, treaties, including now the revival that came in 3rd November 1999, which then took place to revive the East African community in 2000. Of course, it took shape in 7th July 2000. That was when it took shape. Now, the other thing I want now to base my discussion to answer the question you've asked me. On 15th January 2001, the first summit took place when the head of states came together, and the meeting took place in Arusha. The summit took place in Arusha, where they signed a protocol on the rules of procedures of how the summit of the head of states should be. And then we also see a protocol where they signed the rules of procedures of how to join into the committee or community or the federation. Now, within that period, the East African community was then launched in Tanzania within that year, 2001. You ask about whether DRC and then Somalia that joining in is a burden. One thing we need to put across, East Africa is strategically located for geopolitics. Now, when you look the entrance to East Africa, it hosts the Islamic and then the Christian religion, kind of. Now, Somalia, you talked about Somalia owning business, and they gave in the history, the president gave in the history of what Somalia went through. Now, Somalia, to my knowledge, when you talk about Somalia, someone will characterize Somalia with Al-Shabaab. Now, looking at how the bombing took place, the arrest, the conflict in Somalia, when you come to DRC, the ADF, it has been there. Now, the question is, they are coming into the federation. Is it a burden? Now, one thing I want to say, East Africa in general, we are rich with natural resources. And the idea of having a unified body for the East Africa or the Federation of East Africa, one is to exploit the resource we have, by the way. Now, if we look at the oil, currently, the oil aspect, Uganda has oil deposits, you go to Kenya, go to Tanzania, and these other countries. Now, exploitation of natural resources is very easy. Now, we have seen Somalia coming in, and they're too much into oil and gas. Now, this is one thing that we can, as an East African Federation, we know very well. We need resources, human resources, to exploit these other natural resources. Now, which, if we cannot do in Uganda, that's why we are now seeing Uganda having that pipeline to Tanzania. Because in Uganda, we don't have that capacity yet. Now, the coming in of these two member states, it is to both the benefit and then at the same time will harm. The question we should ask ourselves, do we really have the strong defense? What is the mechanism we are going to use, in other words, to address the conflict in this other region? We should not leave alone Southern Sudan. Because when you talk about the conflict region, there is Southern Sudan, DRC, and then Somalia. Now, what mechanism are we going to use to address this? Do we really have the capacity to answer or to handle this? Because you will now see in the history that Somalia, how they go into their election. How are we going to have that?
Okay.
There are very many questions to ask. But
Okay,
then,
so we are going to take a short break from that point, and when we come back, you'll continue right from that point that you're making.
thank you.
Yes, thank you. So let's take a short break and get right back to the discussion.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create, and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices, and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back from that short break. We are still having students from All Saints University, Lango, and we are discussing the future of the East African Federation. So, Acur, we were at the point when you were still discussing some of these issues. So, you can finish the point you were making.
Thank you very much. And once again, welcome from the break. Just as I was making my point, now looking at the political arena, the location, the geopolitical location of East Africa, I talked about East Africa, being at the shores of the Indian Ocean, and then the other part of the Red Sea. East Africa is, able to host in the Islamic and then the Christian history. Now, the Christianity, in other words, let me say that. Now, what has taken shape in Somalia? In other words, people normally claim that it is the religious kind of, where you see those people, they just swallow bombs, they blow, they blast anywhere. But then, I want to draw this point, looking at the election aspect. Now, East Africa Community of Federation has the rules and procedures on how to admit these other states. And subject to the fast track, we are saying the president of Somalia gave a history on what they went through and the influence they can bring into the federation. But then, my question was, later on, we want to achieve the political federation of East Africa.
That is having one president.
Having one president. But the trend, the political trend of these other countries, now it differs. It all differs from country A to country Z. It differs. Now that, at the end of the day, will bring us to ask ourselves, are we going to realize this? If we bring all these states, how are we going to realize this? That calls for a discussion. I pause or tender in as per now.
Okay, let me move to Lucky. So, Lucky, looking at the conflicts in these countries, what is the role of the East African community when it comes to conflict resolution in these countries?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. As we know the aim of the East African Community or Federation, their aim is to promote peace. But when we talk of the conflict in this region, their role is to come in whenever there is conflict in any of the member states. How then will they come in? That is the question that we are asking ourselves. They should come in with peace talk campaign, because when there is already a conflict in a state, it will end a lot of things. There will not be free movement of people. There is no free movement of goods, because all the East African countries, they share in trade. And then when we have when we have conflict already in between these countries, in order for this conflict to be solved amicably, the East African community has to come in and talk to the two parties and see how can they handle, where is the problem coming from, how best can they come in one accord. And
Okay,
also,
Debla, if I can just interrupt you right there.
yes,
Has the EAC been doing that? Has the EAC been resolving conflicts within its member states?
not really. They have not been doing. But that is also one of the roles that they are supposed to play as the East Africa, because they are one body. Because when we talk of the union, it means that they are one. They have to speak the same language, because they can't see Uganda being hindered from entering into Rwanda and they just keep quiet. Yet they know that Rwanda and Uganda, they have something common that that they're sharing. Like now when we talk of Uganda, the beans that people are eating in Uganda, they are ferrying it from Rwanda. Then now when Uganda has this conflict with Rwanda, how will they trade? How will they meet freely? First of all, they will block their border. So as the East African community or the Federation, they have to come in and talk to these people. They have to make them understand. They have to make them to agree. They will tell them what is supposed to be done, and also need being providing security in that country. But if they say they're going to provide security maybe in only one country, it will again look like they are being segregative. So the East African community has also to bring in some rules and some policies whereby it will help these countries that is conflicting among themselves to come to one accord. Need being providing, like the case of East African Federation, there are treaties that were signed. There are the roles that guide and unite all these countries together. But then now talk of conflict. Conflict is something that hinders a lot of things, because let's talk of Somalia, the bombing that always take place in Somalia. We talk of South Sudan. South Sudan is a rich state. It is a very rich state. But then they themselves, they have failed to harmonize among themselves. Then when we talk of East African coming in to play their part, they have to come in and play their part in a way that it will solve everything in an amicable way. It will solve things, though it is not easy for the parties that is maybe fighting. There is a saying that says where two elephants are fighting, it is the grass that suffers. So in this state of conflict, they have to make these people understand that not only by fighting or not only by bringing chaos can solve things. When we sit down and talk, we sit down and agree, we sit down as one body, everything can be harmonized. And that is the role of East African community. That is the role that they are supposed to play in order for the conflict in this region to be harmonized.
Okay.
Thank you.
Maybe
Okay, let's have Emmanuel adding then Acur.
All right. Maybe to add on the question you've posed to my colleague, it is true that I've seen Uganda giving a hand to Somalia.
Yes, even South Sudan. Actually.
Even in South Sudan. So to me, if it was engineered by the formation, I would say yes. But if it was a decision of our head of state, being the general himself, Yoweri Museveni Kaguta, that means we should only advocate for this head of state to encourage these other states to first of all embrace peace. But if we are going to, have a common line that if there's problem in Somalia, all these other states should come together, send their force, send their armies to address the issue, that we would consider as a right format that shall enable us achieve. Because if all these states are doing that, that means it's already, we are eating the punchline, heading to the direction
what
of
you want to see is the summit sit down and come with a concrete point, a common understanding on what to do when a country has a
giving
conflict.
instruction that if there's an issue in Sudan, all of us, we need to say, if you are sending 10, you send 10, you send 10. Then let's converge and then work out the issue of security.
Okay.
So that would mean really a union, because you will be patriotic enough, you will put yourself in that shoes, you will feel, if I was in Sudan, you get that.
Okay.
So that's to me.
Okay, yes, Acur.
Thank you very much. I want to appreciate my honorable colleagues for what they've just said. And looking at the role of EAC in conflict, I want to take us back somehow a little bit far back. When East African community was formed, originally among the former East African countries, East Africa, which comprised of Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, you realize when Apollo Milton Obote was overthrown by Idi Amin, he went into exile. But then we saw the Ugandan army, some part went to Tanzania, they were trained. Now Tanzanian and Ugandan, and then Zambia also added in some effort. Now to see that Idi Amin was overthrown, that was a coalition that was built. And we appreciate Nyerere supporting Obote by then, because that is a sign of security, in other words, peace and security. Now the question is the role of EAC in conflict or wars. The other thing I also want us to know is when the idea of having a united Africa came in, Africa was being subjected towards colonial rule by then. Now, you see, these people came in and they wanted to take Africa. We saw what happened in South Africa. Nelson Mandela was jailed, but then they fought for their freedom. Now, when the formation of East African community was being championed or fronted, the idea was to have a unified body, so that when there is coming in a conflict, we can resist. We can have that strong coalition. Because of what happened when Obote was overthrown, but then with the Tanzania coming in, Nyerere supporting him, he was able to come back in the country. And you realize today what is happening. We saw when there was war, conflict in Somalia, Uganda sent the UPDF. Now you realize that the African Union facilitated not only Uganda sending the soldiers, we had other countries also sending in. Now, as we talk now, we still have the UPDF in Somalia.
Yes, under the AMISOM.
Yeah. Now, the same thing happened. Now today we are seeing what is happening in Congo, and the UPDF is already in Congo. Now, this is the strength that we have in the community as East Africa.
Right there, Acur. Do you think there is a possibility that one day we will see the East African community having a joint voice and say, with the conflict in Somalia, this is what we should do? Okay, when Somalia becomes part, the conflict in Congo as the EAC, this is what we want should be done. And then there is a common stand, and we have all these countries implementing it. Do you think one day we'll see an EAC where we join forces and we say all these countries are contributing to the army that is going to fight the conflict in Somalia? Do you think we will see an EAC that will be doing that?
Thank you very much. My answer is yes, but on a condition that we attain a political federation. If we still don't have a political federation of East Africa, where we are saying we are having a one president for the entire federation, then we might not yet reach there.
Okay.
But if we attain the political federation, then we shall have that voice. But as per now, all the member states, they own their sovereignty. And every country, wants to strengthen up their military organ. But now, East African community, they have the peace and security agreement, but which at the moment I want to say, to me, it is not effective.
Okay.
So for us to have that or reach to that extent of NATO, then East African Federation needs to front in a political federation, and we have a one president. That is when we shall have that coming in. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me come back to Winny. So Winny, let's talk about trade wars within the East African community. We have had goods from Uganda being blocked from Kenya. We have had Uganda impose 100% tax on imported sugar. Basically, the reason Uganda gives is to protect the domestic industries, because we already produce a lot of sugar. We have had Rwanda block their border since 2019. They blocked their border for close to over 2 years. So, and then there are issues of Ugandan traders in South Sudan having a very hard time. How do we have a common market within the EAC with all these trade wars ongoing within the EAC countries?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think your question is very right, because we are seeing so many things happening, and yet at the beginning of it, we said East African community came together. One of the reasons they wanted, like, economically to be at the same level. But currently, when you see what is happening trade-wise, there are a lot of ideologies that are coming in. There's a lot of trade protectionism, whereby a country is putting a lot of restriction onto another country to carry out trade, and yet at the initial stage that was not the statement. Then also some other country have gone that far of having a kind of a closed economy, whereby they don't want other traders from other country to really invent in their country, and that is highly being witnessed in South Sudan. And then also another thing is the taxation. You realize that there are a lot of, there is high rates of tax being levied on goods that enter from another country into what? Into other country. So your question is like, how can they what can be done to really limit the trade wars that are happening in the East African country. I want to give my views concerning that. I think they really need to put into practice what they had said, or what they had put theoretically, like removing trade protectionism and allowing free trade among the East African countries, because I believe if this is liberalized, then we are not going to encounter the issues of trade wars, because we are going to have this freedom whereby Uganda can trade freely with Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, South Sudan without any problem. Then also we are going to have the freedom of goods coming from other country into Uganda, for example, freely, and also goods from Uganda being exported to other country freely. So if that is being done, I think the issue of the trade wars will be limited among the East African countries.
Okay, thank you. Yes, let's have Emmanuel, then we have Acur.
Madam Moderator, you need to agree with me as I bring in some impediments in regards to the trade war. We have the Management Act.
Yes, the East African
Customs Management Act. What I am seeing at the fingertip is that these member states are not doing the monitoring. They have a policy, but they are not utilizing. Because when you look at that policy, it's rich. It gives directives of how the business can be done. But we see a lot of bureaucracy during the process. Traders from Uganda taking their goods in Kenya. There's a lot of segregation, first of all, in that, meaning that they are jumping away from what they have agreed, what they have put in black and white, and they're not, using those policies to guide them, because those policies gives a proper channel on how this market can be run. Now, when we look at such, there are a lot of intimidation during such stage. When we bring your good and it's rejected, you are stopped at the border, yet you have an agreement that we shall do what? We shall be one, We need to advocate for, maybe reviving on this, sensitizing, because even that policy is there, is lying. People, these traders are not aware how they, go about doing their trade. So our head of state and then the management team is supposed to do a lot of sensitization, such that as you enter into a business, as you package your product sending for market in Kenya, the policy which is at hand must be first of all observed, because I'm seeing a lot of irregularities also from both businessmen and the authority. So for us to address the issue of trade war, first of all, we need to sensitize ourselves on what law do we have that govern us in trade. 2, we need to ease in our boundaries for our goods to enter without a lot of bureaucracy, without a lot of threat, without, because we are looking at a union. We are looking at a pillar that is East African Federation. Now, our head of state, to me, I see that they have a lot of role to play. And then this Council of Ministers, they have a lot to play, because if you realize that at a border A, there's a problem A, B, C, D, and you sit silently, you don't address that issue, that means you are promoting. You get? So I see that this council these councils which has been formed are not doing the actual work they were supposed to do. We need to champion in issues of monitoring and evaluation, how this trade is being carried out, what are the problems they are facing there, then what are the solutions should be sent there if we are to call ourselves a federation. Thank you.
Okay, yes, Acur.
Thank you very much, the moderator. When I was giving the history, the background of the East African Federation, I made mention of what by then was called the Kampala Agreement. Now, I'm still zeroing back there, because now when you talk about the trade war within the East African community, it starts from there. 1964, when Kampala Agreement was being signed between the head of states of these other member states, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. We talked about the industrial development when Uganda was given that opportunity to host the nitrogenous factory. Now, Tanzania was taking up the tire factory. Now, you realize that after the agreement, now in 1965, remember, Julius Nyerere demanded for equitable development in Tanzania. Now, in 1965, Tanzania set up what is called a state trading corporation. Now, when Tanzania came up with that, in 1965, they imposed taxes on 70% of goods that was coming from Kenya and Uganda to Tanzania. That was when the trade war began. Now, by 1967, Tanzania signed for a loan from China about 4.164 billion. Now, immediately, Tanzania achieving that, they withdrew. They exit, in other words, the agreement. That was enough to say that they are not able to continue with that agreement. The trade war began from there because they could not have that concessions on the agreement. Now, with what is happening currently, we talked about Kenya closing up their border for Uganda. But then
yeah, they were rejecting
goods in other words.
Yes, Ugandan maize goods and milk.
Yeah. You see, one thing that we need to know is Kenya also have industries of such. Uganda too have industries. Now, this came about them not honoring the agreement, because if the Kampala Agreement of 1964 was honored, you realize that Uganda would be branded for a specific commodity, Tanzania the same, and Kenya the same. Now, we would have all these commodities being shared among ourselves. But at the end of the day, there was this, what Julius Nyerere came with. Of course, he wanted, the industrial development for Tanzania. And he cannot, be being pointed for that. He has a right of doing that. Now, when Kenya was blocking or rejecting the cereals from Uganda, that alone reflects a trade war. Something was wrong. Why Kenya could no longer accept cereals and the milk from Uganda. Now, if you go through the allegation, the Kenya were complaining that the maize being sent from Uganda was rotten.
Yeah, that it had some toxins.
Yes, yeah. That is it. Now, that brought about the trade war. Now, look at what happened between Uganda and Rwanda. For the entire 1 year, the border was closed. That means there was no business between Uganda and Rwanda. You could not access that. Now, the other thing that is bringing about, or that brought about the trade war, as we talk at the moment, the question is, do we really have the free movement to conduct business within the member states? No. When you go to South Sudan, with the South Sudanese, they have access to gun at will. At will. Now, for us in Uganda, And I believe in Kenya, Tanzania, you don't own a gun if you're not a security personnel. Now, businessmen,
just anyhow only.
businessmen, when you go to Sudan, South Sudan, in other words, we have had a number of many cases, truck drivers being murdered, being killed, shot to death, ambushed, because they own gun and they use it for anything they want. Now, that brings about the trade war we are talking about. And now, Uganda today also have taxes imposed on all goods that is being imported from Kenya, Tanzania, from where there's that tax. Now, the trade war comes in, and there is no way we can address this. The other thing that will only help us to addressing this is to ask ourselves the question, do we really have at heart the spirit of the federation?
Okay.
Do we really have at heart, and the idea of having a single currency? Now, finally, about the trade war, we have, I appreciate Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, that about 130 ethnic groups in Tanzania, he was able to unite Tanzania by bringing in a common language. And today, when a Tanzanian met a fellow Tanzanian in Uganda, the question will not be about the ethnicity, whether you are from Zanzibar, Kilimanjaro, or where. They know they are Tanzanian. Now, with us here, someone from Karamoja can come here and he will easily be identified that this is a northerner. And this is someone from the central. Now, at the end of the day, you realize the trade war, first of all, exists within the member states. Now, when you talk about the East African community, we should not forget that trade war exists within our own countries.
That's true.
Okay.
Basing on the ethnicity. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Acur. Let's talk about elections. Debla, we are just coming out of elections from Kenya, and we have seen Kenya is in court now over the election. But we have also read several observer reports, and we have seen over the media how people have been comparing Kenyan election with different countries, especially with Uganda. Issues of there was no ban of use of social media, they had electricity, they had internet, and all these things. So my question to you specifically is that, what lesson do we learn from Kenya?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. My answer to that question is the lesson that we have learned from the Kenyan election is Kenya has tried and they have demonstrated and proven to us that we can move away from a terrible violence election to a zero election. Because we believe, like in Uganda, when we hear of election, what really comes into our mind? We will start picturing how somebody will be killed, how people will be tortured, how people will be beaten. Because like for case of election in Uganda, when we are nearing to the election time, you see the LDUs everywhere. You see you are not allowed to move freely. They restrict everywhere. Like the current election that we had, 2021, a day before election, we all got the information that the access to internet and Facebook was not allowed. And just a day after election, there was internet shut down. But Kenya has proven that without all those things, we can still have that free and fair election that we really need. And also, Kenya has proven that with having everybody free, not really arresting opposition or arresting the supporters, we can still have that free election. And they have also demonstrated to us that having a supreme independent court can also make us to have that that free election that we hope for. Because like for our case in Uganda, the court itself, it's in the government. Then, like as a child, your father has wronged you. Can't you really show your father to the court? It does not look well to the eyes of the people. But if we really can have also our own independent court, whereby in case of election, that if election has been carried on, anybody will be free. When you're not really contented with the result that has come up, you'll move to court and your case will be handled amicably. And for us, in some of other countries, like, and even we are also among them, most of us, since we do not have that independent court, whenever election has been carried on, somebody is not contented, we see people going to the street. They go to street to express their feelings instead of going to court, because they know that when they go to court, they are not always listened to, and even if they are to be given that listening ears, they will not be favored. There will always be that unfair outcome of your case. And also, Kenya has made some tries. We cannot compare with the election that they had 5 years, no, in 2007. There is really a change.
There's a big difference.
There is a big difference. We cannot compare with any other election in any other state. So what can we learn from Kenya is, by agreeing or coming together, we will be able to have this free and fair election. And also, the Kenyan also told us that in order for us to have this free election, it is for everybody, not for a particular group, not for this party, not for this government, but everyone to come together, everyone to speak the same language, everybody to understand each other. Because when we see, like when we are to have election, you'll see that you talk of campaign, other parties are being hindered from saying out their views. Meanwhile, you go to other radios or televisions, you find that if the NUP is allowed here, come FDC will not be allowed here. Okay. And in such situations, election cannot be run well. But Kenya has proven that treating everybody equally, moving and speaking the same language and doing everything in the light can make us to have free and fair election. All these countries, though we have multi-parties, we don't have free and fair election. It is only Kenya that has tried. They are demonstrating to us that we can have what we call free and fair election.
Okay, thank you. We have run out of time. We have come to the end of our discussion, and I'm going to give each panelist a minute to give us what their wish for, what they would wish for the future of the East African community. And I'll start right with Emmanuel.
Well, thank you very much. I have been yearning to have a voice over this, looking at quite a number of challenges that we have seen in the history. One, to me, I think if we need to attain the federation, first of all, we need to be patriotic. We need to accept ourselves. We need to even know what we want. So my point is that let's get back to the line of the truth, because we have seen a lot of ping pong politics, which give a lot of setback. A right decision is proposed, but vested interest comes in and disrupts. So let's get back to handle reality. Let's not bring in issues of phony rawa. I had a saying in Luganda. People normally brings in, where do I eat from first, before even executing, before even succeeding, you know. So if we want to get to that state where we are fully pledged, we are united, we are doing things in the right manner. Let's leave alone issues of where do I get from. It is one of the reasons why people are keeping on separating day in, day out, because they disagree to disagree instead of disagreeing to agree. That's my view.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Emmanuel. Yes, let's have Winnie.
Yeah, thank you very much. As we come to the conclusion of this, under the main theme of what is the future of East African Federation, and basing on our discussion, we will realize that the future is very dark. And now we are making a resolution that what could be done to really make the future more brighter. To me, I think we should all be willing to be under one umbrella of East Africa, living alone the country as an individual. Then, if we are together, we are speaking the same language, and we should be willing to do more of practical than theory. Just like we have learned from Kenya election, they have really given us a lot of lessons. For instance, what happened before election, during election, and after election. We realize that to a greater extent, they are really exercising what their roles and regulations as far as election is concerned is being put in place, of which I believe any other East African country, they really have it. But the problem comes in the individuals that always handle the election matters, and advancement in the technology has really jeopardized everything. So if we really want to make East Africa as one, we should really put more of practical than theory.
Yes. Thank you, Winnie. Yes, Acur.
Thank you very much. I don't want to enter out without saying something about the Kenya election. If I don't say it, it will look like I've been deprived of my
Yes,
right.
in a minute.
In 1 minute, one thing I want to say, you asked my colleague about the lessons we can learn from Kenya. I really want to say Kenya has demonstrated maturity in their body politics. One thing we can learn from Kenya is that we can uphold and respect the constitution. Kenya National Constitution talks about the term limit, and we have seen President Uhuru Kenyatta respected and obeyed the constitution, even when he had the capacity of fronting the change of the scrapping off of the term limit. He respected the constitution. That is one thing we can learn. The other thing we can learn from Kenyan election, 2017, we heard about post-election violence. 2007, yeah. There was that post-election violence. Now, where you see 600,000 people, about 600,000 people were arrested, and about 145 people died because of that. But then, looking at what happened after the results of 2017, Kenyatta accepted and brought in Raila. We witnessed this during National Prayer Breakfast when they had the presidential handshake. And I love the president Raila made. The presentation Raila made. And he said, never shall a Kenyan die because of an election. Never shall a Kenyan deprive a fellow Kenyan because of an election. And indeed, just the recent concluded election, we have seen some maturity in the politics of Kenya. Election went on well, except something that happened within the commission. We don't know. We are yet to hear what the court will rule.
Okay.
To me, I want to say the future of East African Federation comes in when we address the issue or the question of the citizenship. That I post as an advice or a concern to the head of state, that when they meet, the question of citizenship should be answered. That is if we need to achieve the federation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's have Lucky.
Thank you so much. According to me, my view is for us to achieve the future of East African Federation, first of all all these states needs to have love and the heart for one another. And also they should run away from this issue of self-benefit first. They should not consider themselves so much. They will first have to look at what are we going to benefit after this? Because what is going to come out if they come together and unite as one will be more of what each and every country will achieve as a single country. And also they also have to learn that not each and everything they have to have conflict or they have to have misunderstanding. Sometimes we disagree in order to agree, but they have to learn in a mature way and solve everything in an amicable way in order for the East Africa to have the bright future that we offer. Because as for now, we do not have that bright future that we offer still. That is my view.
Okay, thank you so much. I would like to say thank you to our dear panelists from All Saints University, Lango. Thank you so much for your good articulation of this topic. I would like to say thank you so much to Civic Space TV and Center for Constitutional Governance for bringing this program of inter-university debate, where university students are able to discuss matters that affect the country as well as the world at large. Thank you so much for our dear audience for watching. I would like to say feel free to let us know your comments in the comment section. What do you think about this topic? And please feel free to go to the different social media pages of Civic Space TV and Center for Constitutional Governance and give your view on the future of the East African Federation. I would like to say thank you, and we end here from us. Bye.